Open the door, Mr. Thompson. Your wife is under arrest. The pounding was so sharp and steady, it rattled the pictures on our living room wall. Oakwood Heights was usually quiet at this hour. Kids riding bikes, sprinklers hissing, dogs barking at mailmen. But that voice, it turned my front porch into something from a bad crime show. I pulled the door open and found 4 men standing shoulder to shoulder. They wore dark blue police uniforms, pressed and sharp. Each had sunglasses that hid their eyes, pistols already drawn. No smiles, no greetings, just the kind of silence that told you trouble had arrived. "Step aside, sir. She's coming with us," the man in front said. His jaw was square, his tone flat, as if this was just another errand. For a moment, all I could hear was the blood in my ears. I'm no stranger to authority, but even I knew something didn't fit. No badge numbers, no nameplates, no paperwork in hand, just guns, uniforms, and a claim. From somewhere down the block, a dog barked. Curtains shifted in the house across the street. Oakwood Heights had always been a neighborhood where people noticed everything, and now they were noticing me, my porch, and these 4 men in blue. "You've got the wrong house," I said, my hand still on the doorknob. "Or at least the wrong people." The leader didn't blink. "Mr. Thompson, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Call her out. Now." Behind me, I heard the sound of soft footsteps on hardwood. My wife's voice followed, calm, even. "Michael, what's going on?" I turned my head just enough. "They say they're here for you." Her answer wasn't fear. It was steady as stone. "I'll handle it." The screen door creaked, and then Sarah stepped onto the porch. She wasn't in pajamas, and she sure wasn't nervous. She came out in full sheriff's uniform, silver badge gleaming against her chest, sunlight catching the edges. The morning breeze carried the faint crackle of her shoulder radio. The 4 men shifted like the ground had tilted beneath them. One's grip on his pistol slipped. Another cleared his throat. For the first time, doubt cracked their performance. Sarah didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You're pointing guns at my husband. Holster them. Now." The leader tried to recover. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern Sheriff Sarah Thompson," she cut in, tapping her badge. "ID on my belt. Dispatch on my shoulder. If you're real officers, you already know who I am. If you're not, you're impersonating law enforcement with loaded weapons. That's 10 years in prison, minimum." No one spoke. The air itself seemed to tighten. Somewhere across the street, a phone camera clicked. I spotted old Mr. Jenkins leaning on his mailbox, recording everything. The neighborhood was watching, and these men knew it. Sarah pressed the button on her radio. Her voice carried with the same calm weight it always did. "Dispatch, this is Sheriff 214 Sierra. 4 unidentified subjects in dark blue uniforms at my residence. They're claiming a warrant for my arrest. Confirm any active orders." The reply came quick, loud enough for every ear on that porch. 214 Sierra, negative. "No warrants. Units rolling your way. Copy 4 impersonators." The color drained from the leader's face. He looked left, then right, as if an exit might magically appear. The second man muttered something under his breath. The third avoided eye contact entirely, and the fourth, he simply froze, like a mannequin caught in daylight. "You heard dispatch," Sarah said. "Drop your weapons, place your hands where I can see them, and wait for my deputies. Or keep pushing, and you'll spend the rest of the day explaining to a judge why you thought you could kidnap a sheriff in her own front yard." The morning sun felt hotter all of a sudden. The air, heavier. In the distance, faint but rising, came the sound of sirens. Real sirens. And that was the moment I knew. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was the beginning of something far bigger. The sirens started faint, just a hum under the morning air. But they grew louder with every heartbeat. Real law was on its way, and the 4 men in dark blue uniforms knew it. I could see it in their stances, the tight jaws, the twitching fingers, the quick glances toward the street. The leader tried to salvage authority. He lifted his chin and barked, "Ma'am, we're not here to debate. You're under arrest. Step forward, now." Sarah didn't flinch. "On what charge?" she asked. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but it carried the weight of a gavel. "Produce the paperwork. Show me who signed it, or admit you have nothing." For a second, no one spoke. The morning sun poured down on us, glinting off their fake badges. Across the street, Mrs. Parker stood on her porch in her robe, holding her phone high. The mail carrier had stopped 2 houses down, watching with his satchel still slung over his shoulder. Oakwood Heights was no longer just my front yard. It was a stage, and the whole neighborhood was the audience. The second man shifted uneasily. "Sir," he said to me, his voice quieter, "please move aside. Don't make this harder." I shook my head. "You walked onto my property, aimed guns at me, and threatened my wife. It's already hard." Sarah took a step forward, sunlight flashing across her badge. "Gentlemen," she said, "I've put people in cuffs for less than what you're doing right now. Impersonating law enforcement, brandishing firearms, attempted kidnapping. That's a long list, and the sirens you hear mean you won't be explaining it to me. You'll be explaining it to my deputies." The leader's jaw tightened. He raised his pistol higher, as if to remind us who was supposed to be in control. "You think that badge makes you untouchable?" Sarah's eyes narrowed, and for the first time her voice carried steel. "No, but it makes me real, which is more than I can say for you." The crowd across the street grew thicker. Neighbors were filming openly now, murmurs spreading like wildfire. Even the men in blue could hear it, the word fake floating from one mouth to another. The third man finally broke. His hands trembled, the muzzle of his pistol wobbling. "This wasn't supposed to go like this," he muttered. "Shut up," the leader snapped, glaring over his shoulder. But the crack in his command was wide enough for everyone to see. Sarah took advantage. "Drop your weapons," she ordered. "Put your hands where I can see them. If you comply now, maybe the DA will go lighter. Keep resisting, and you'll be the headline tonight." The sirens were close now, screaming down Laurel Avenue, echoing off the brick fronts of Oakwood Heights. The leader flicked another glance toward the corner, weighing his options. Fight, flee, or surrender in front of a dozen phones and a sheriff who had every advantage. He chose bluster. "This isn't over," he growled, but his hands twitched, and his men weren't backing him up. One lowered his weapon, another shuffled a step back. The fourth kept staring at his boots like they held the answers. Sarah didn't move, didn't blink. She just waited, steady as stone. And in that stillness, I realized something important. These men had walked up to our house with confidence, uniforms, and guns, but the second real authority stood in front of them. They looked like exactly what they were, frauds playing dress-up. The sirens wailed louder, tires screeched at the corner, and in the next breath, red and blue lights washed over the street, spilling across the lawn, across the imposters, across Sarah's badge, shining like a mirror of truth. The red and blue lights hit the street like a flood. 2 patrol cars screeched to a stop in front of our house, tires chirping against the asphalt. Doors flew open. Deputies in tan uniforms stepped out, weapons drawn, eyes locked on the 4 men in dark blue. "Drop the guns," one deputy barked. "Now!" The imposters hesitated, caught between keeping up the act and admitting it was over. The leader's jaw worked like he was chewing nails, but even he could see the trap snapping shut. Slowly, too slowly, he lowered his pistol, metal clattering against the concrete. The others followed, one by one, the sound of surrender ringing louder than their threats ever had. Sarah didn't blink. She held her ground on the porch, radio still crackling on her shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Sheriff 214 Sierra. Confirm units on scene." The answer came fast and strong, carried on every neighbor's video. "Confirmed. Units present. 4 impersonators detained." That word, impersonators, rolled through the crowd like thunder. Across the street, Mrs. Parker gasped. Mr. Jenkins muttered, "I knew something was off." Phones rose higher, recording every second. Our quiet block had turned into a stage, and the story was writing itself. One of the men, the youngest looking, stared at the ground, his hands cuffed behind his back. His lips moved in a whisper I almost caught. "Wasn't supposed to go this way." Sarah stepped down off the porch, silver badge catching the sunlight. The deputies made room for her without question. This was her show now. "You 4 picked the wrong house, the wrong morning, and the wrong sheriff," she said, voice carrying clear enough for every lens and microphone. "Oakwood Heights is safe. You're done here." The leader finally spoke, his voice stripped of authority, raw and sour. "This isn't the end." Sarah leaned in just enough that only he and I could hear. "It is for you." The neighborhood erupted in low chatter, phones buzzing as videos uploaded in real time. By nightfall, half the county would see what I'd just lived. But standing there, watching the imposters in their fake uniforms get loaded into real squad cars. I felt something shift deep in my gut. This wasn't just about 4 men with guns. This was planned, funded, backed by someone who thought they had the right to send armed pretenders to our door. And I had a sick feeling we were only scratching the surface. The cruisers still sat in the street, red and blue lights bouncing across every window in Oakwood Heights. Deputies were locking the last of the 4 imposters into the back seat when another figure came striding up the sidewalk. Gregory Allen, pressed khakis, golf shirt tucked too tight, clipboard under his arm like it was a shield. He was the president of our HOA, the kind of man who could quote bylaws the way a preacher quotes scripture. He marched straight into the middle of the chaos, red-faced and breathing hard. "This is outrageous," he barked. "You can't just haul them off like common criminals. They were here on official business." Sarah turned her head slowly, eyes narrowing. "Official business?" she repeated. "Yes." Gregory puffed out his chest. "They're compliance officers, hired by this community. They have the authority to enforce regulations when residents refuse to follow the rules." His voice cracked on that last word, but he pushed through. "You've been ignoring notices, Sheriff Thompson, and the board will not tolerate exceptions." The crowd, still gathered on sidewalks and porches, stirred like a hive. Murmurs rippled. Phones pointed now, not just at the patrol cars, but at Gregory, the man they had all written dues checks to for years. Sarah stepped forward, her boots solid on the pavement. The deputies gave her space. Because this wasn't a police matter anymore. This was personal. "Compliance officers," she said, her tone even but sharp enough to cut glass. "Real compliance officers don't wear dark blue police uniforms, wave guns at civilians, and claim to have arrest warrants signed by imaginary judges." Gregory's face went blotchy, sweat shining under the sun. "You're twisting this. They were only doing their job. They impersonated law enforcement," Sarah snapped, her voice finally rising. "That's a felony. And you," she jabbed a finger toward his clipboard, "you paid for it. You put this entire neighborhood in danger." A gasp went through the crowd. Mrs. Parker muttered, "Paid for it?" loud enough for 3 phones to catch. Gregory tried to backpedal. "Now, wait just a minute. The board approved security measures. Nothing more. Security doesn't involve pointing loaded weapons at my husband and on our front porch," Sarah shot back. "And it doesn't involve forged warrants either. You want to call this compliance? A jury will call it something else." For the first time in years, Gregory looked small. He glanced at the neighbors, the same people who'd nodded politely at his newsletters, who'd signed his petitions without reading the fine print. Now, their eyes burned holes through him. Someone in the back yelled, "You put us all at risk." Another added, "My kids were outside." Phones were still rolling. Every word was evidence. Gregory's hand twitched on his clipboard, like he wanted to hold it up as a shield. But there was no shield left. Not from Sarah, not from the law, and not from the neighbors finally seeing him for what he was. And standing there, I realized the imposters weren't the real danger. The real danger was the man who thought he could buy them. For a heartbeat, Oakwood Heights held its breath. Deputies stood with their hands on holsters. Neighbors crowded the sidewalks, phones glowing like lanterns. Gregory Allen, red-faced and sputtering, tried to salvage his story about compliance officers. And then, everything cracked. One of the imposters, the one with jittery hands and a scar running down his cheek, suddenly lunged. His wrists were cuffed in front, sloppy work by the deputies still trying to wrangle the others. With a guttural shout, he broke free of the deputy's grip and charged straight at Sarah. The crowd gasped. Mrs. Parker screamed. He had one arm raised, the steel cuff swinging like a weapon, the other reaching for the cuffs hanging on Sarah's belt. "You're coming with us, Sheriff," he bellowed, spit flying. Time slowed, the way it sometimes does in moments you'll never forget. I saw the sunlight flash on the cuff as it came down. I saw Sarah's eyes narrow, calm as a surgeon's before the first cut. And then she moved. She pivoted on her heel, caught his arm mid-swing, and twisted. The crack of bone carried across the lawn like a gunshot. His shout turned into a howl as she swept his legs out from under him. He hit the porch hard, face first, cuffed hands pinned painfully behind his back. Sarah planted her knee on his shoulder and yanked the cuffs from his belt in one smooth motion. "Attempted assault on a sheriff," she said, her voice cutting through his groans. "Add that to the list." The neighborhood erupted in sound. Cheers, shouts, a chorus of phones clicking. Mr. Jenkins shouted, "Get him, Sheriff!" Someone else hollered, "About time!" The deputies swarmed in, securing the man properly this time, double-locking the cuffs and dragging him upright. His scarred face was pale now, sweat dripping down his temple. The fight had gone out of him completely. Sarah rose to her feet, brushing the dust from her uniform. Her badge gleamed brighter than ever in the morning sun. She didn't even look winded. Gregory Allen stepped back, eyes darting from Sarah to the crowd to the deputies. His argument about compliance officers was gone now, drowned under the evidence of violence. He muttered, "This wasn't how it was supposed to happen," but his words were swallowed by the crowd's noise. I caught Sarah's glance, and for the first time that morning, I realized what she was doing. This wasn't just defense, this was exposure. She wasn't just protecting herself, she was showing the entire neighborhood, on camera, who the real threats were. The leader of the imposters, still standing cuffed near the patrol car, tried one last line of bravado. "You think this ends here? We're not alone." Sarah turned her gaze on him, steady as stone. "Then let them come. I'll be waiting." The man looked away. He had no answer. Neighbors pressed closer now, forming a ring around Gregory, around the deputies, around us. Questions spilled out. Who sent them? How did they get uniforms? Why our neighborhood? Sarah held up a hand, quieting the noise. "There will be answers," she promised. "But for now, the danger is contained. You're safe. That's what matters." Her words worked like water on a fire. The crowd's fear turned into resolve. People nodded, murmured their thanks, lifted their phones higher so every second would be shared. Gregory's face went ashen. For years he had stood at the center of this neighborhood, barking orders about grass height and mailbox paint. Now he was shrinking under the weight of 100 eyes, under the knowledge that the story unfolding here was no longer his to spin. I stood on that porch, the heat of the morning pressing down, and felt something settle in my chest. The imposters had made their move. Sarah had answered it. But beneath it all lay something darker, something orchestrated. This wasn't random, it was planned. And judging by the way Gregory Allen refused to meet anyone's gaze, I knew exactly where the trail would lead next. The imposter still groaned on the porch, where Sarah had dropped him, but the sound of sirens drowned him out. More cruisers tore around the corner, 3, then 4, lights painting every house in red and blue. Oakwood Heights, usually so quiet, looked like the center of a manhunt. Deputies spilled out fast and hard, shotguns leveled, commands shouted. The air snapped with authority that couldn't be faked. "Hands on your head! Down on your knees! Now!" The 3 remaining imposters dropped fast, their bravado gone. They knelt on the asphalt, cuffed wrists pulled tight behind them. The leader tried to shout something, maybe a protest, maybe a threat, but a deputy shoved him against the cruiser and read him his rights. His voice cracked to silence. Neighbors cheered, actual cheers, like we were at a football game. Phones were everywhere now, recording from porches, yards, even the roof of Jenkins's garage. Kids who'd been pulled inside a half hour ago peeked through curtains, wide-eyed. Gregory Allen stood frozen at the curb, clutching his clipboard like a life raft. Every time a deputy barked an order, he flinched. He had wanted control, but now he looked like the smallest man in Oakwood Heights. Sarah stayed calm, hands folded behind her back, silver badge glinting. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. This was her arena, and everyone knew it. A sergeant approached, saluting sharp. "Sheriff, we've got them secured, weapons confiscated, no IDs, no departmental markings, just uniforms." Sarah nodded. "Good. Get them booked for impersonating law enforcement, unlawful detainment, brandishing, and attempted assault. We'll stack the charges properly once we've got statements." The sergeant's eyes flicked toward Gregory. "And him?" Sarah let the question hang in the air. Every neighbor leaned closer, hungry for her answer. Gregory swallowed, his face pale, but said nothing. "Not yet," Sarah said finally, her voice low but firm. "But don't let him leave. He's got questions to answer." The sergeant nodded, motioning for a deputy to shadow Gregory. The HOA president's lips twitched, like he wanted to argue, but he knew better than to test her now. As the imposters were loaded into the back of cruisers, Sarah climbed one step back onto our porch. She looked out over the crowd, steady as stone. "You all saw it," she said, voice carrying strong. These men came here claiming to be police officers. They weren't. They tried to arrest me, your sheriff, with forged authority and loaded weapons. That ends today. This neighborhood is safe, and whoever sent them, her eyes cut to Gregory, who shrank an inch lower, will answer for it. Applause broke out. Not polite clapping, raw, angry relief. Neighbors shouted thanks. Someone yelled, "We've got your back, Sheriff." Another added, "About time someone stood up to the board." Gregory's hands shook on his clipboard. He looked around for an ally and found none. Every phone pointed at him now, every lens capturing his sweat and silence. I caught myself exhaling for the first time in what felt like hours. The imposters were gone, the street buzzing with real deputies, the neighbors united by a common outrage. For a moment, it felt like victory. But Sarah wasn't smiling. I knew that look, the one that meant she was already thinking 2 steps ahead. She leaned close to me, low enough so only I could hear. "This wasn't freelance," she whispered. "Somebody planned it, paid for it, and I think we both know who." I glanced at Gregory. He shifted his weight, eyes darting like a trapped animal. The cruisers pulled away one by one, carrying the imposters toward holding cells and headlines. The neighborhood buzzed with conversation, relief mixing with anger. For the first time in years, the power balance in Oakwood Heights had shifted. And yet, in the middle of the crowd, our HOA president still clutched his clipboard, trembling, already plotting his next move. The cruisers had just pulled away when a deputy jogged back across the lawn, holding a folded sheet of paper in a gloved hand. He looked uneasy, like the page itself carried a bad smell. "Sheriff," he said, "you need to see this. Found it in the jacket pocket of the one with the scar." Sarah took the paper, unfolded it carefully. I leaned in just enough to see. It looked official, county letterhead, judge's seal stamped at the top. Big block letters screamed, "Order of Detention." My wife's name sat in bold right under it. Lines of legal jargon followed, spelling out supposed grounds for arrest. At the bottom, a signature. Only it wasn't a signature. It was a smear that looked like someone had traced it from memory, or maybe copied it from Google Images. The judge named on the paper had retired 3 years ago. Sarah's jaw tightened. "They didn't just fake uniforms," she said, her voice low. "They faked a court order." The deputy nodded grimly. "And Sheriff, look at the footer." At the very bottom, smaller than the rest, was a line of text, prepared by Community Compliance Division. Next to it was a tiny logo, 2 houses overlapping inside a circle. It wasn't from the county, it was from the HOA. Gasps spread through the neighbors as Sarah read it aloud. "Prepared by Community Compliance Division," she repeated, her voice sharp as glass. Gregory Allen's face drained of color. His clipboard sagged in his hands. That's not what it looks like," he stammered. "Really?" Sarah turned, paper held high so every phone could capture it. "Because it looks like you paid imposters to wave around fraudulent arrest orders, complete with forged signatures, and then sent them to my door." Murmurs exploded across the lawn. Mr. Jenkins shouted, "He forged court papers!" Another voice rose from the back. "That's a felony!" Gregory held up a hand, trembling. "No! Listen, this was a misunderstanding, a clerical error. The compliance committee doesn't write warrants," Sarah snapped. "Courts do, judges do, and you, Gregory Allen, are no judge." Phones zoomed in on his blotchy face. Sweat dripped down his temples. For years, Gregory had run Oakwood Heights with newsletters, fines, and fear. But now the crowd wasn't listening to him. They were circling him. Sarah folded the paper crisply, slid it into an evidence bag a deputy offered, and sealed it shut with a snap. "Chain of custody," she said firmly. "This goes straight to the DA." Gregory's lips moved soundlessly. He looked like a man trying to pray with no words left. The neighbors closed ranks tighter, whispers sharp as knives. Someone hissed, "All those fines. How many were real?" Another muttered, "He's been pocketing money for years." The sun was high now, beating down hard, but Gregory's world had already gone dark. He'd just been caught, red-handed, by the one person he could never bully. I glanced at Sarah. Her eyes weren't on Gregory anymore. They were on the evidence bag in her deputy's hand, the fake warrant that tied everything together. And in that look, I saw it. This wasn't just an HOA squabble. This was a conspiracy with paperwork, funding, and a clear intent to intimidate. and we'd only just found the first thread. By the time the cruisers pulled away for booking, Oakwood Heights looked like a block party run by law enforcement. Deputies cordoned off the street, neighbors gathered in clusters, and every phone buzzed with breaking news notifications from the local station. The story was already out. Sarah stood with the sergeant near the back of a cruiser, going over paperwork. I lingered close enough to hear. The evidence bag with the forged warrant lay on the hood, sunlight glinting off the plastic. "Sheriff," the sergeant said, "we ran the footer from that document. Community Compliance Division isn't county, it's a shell. Traces back to a private company, Community Security Solutions, LLC." Sarah's brow furrowed. "Cease?" He nodded. "Out of Houston. They advertise custom neighborhood enforcement. Basically, HOAs contract them to handle violations. But they've been flagged twice for overstepping, trespassing, harassment. Nothing this bold, though." I felt a chill crawl down my back. "So, they've done this before?" "Not in uniform this convincing," the sergeant said. "These weren't mall cops. They had tactical gear, service pistols, forged warrants. Somebody funded them heavy." Sarah crossed her arms, eyes on the forged order. "And Gregory Allen signed the checks." As if on cue, Gregory shuffled up, still flanked by a deputy. His clipboard was gone, his hands restless. He looked less like a president now, and more like a cornered bureaucrat. "Sheriff," he said quickly, "you don't understand. This was supposed to be routine. They assured me they had authority. It was a simple compliance action." "Stop," Sarah cut him off. "You hired imposters. You gave them my name, and you sent them to my home with forged documents and guns. That's not compliance. That's conspiracy." Gregory opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The board voted. "The board didn't sign this contract," Sarah said, holding up the evidence bag. "You did." Neighbors surged closer, hungry for every word. Mr. Jenkins barked, "So that's where our dues went." Someone else shouted, "You risked our kids for this?" Gregory's face flushed scarlet. He stammered, "It's not like that. It's... But his excuses drowned under the rising voices of the crowd. Phones filmed his every twitch. The sergeant tapped his tablet, pulling up a screen for Sarah. "Look here. CS has been linked to incidents in 3 other subdivisions. One in Dallas, family forced off their property after repeated compliance raids. Another in Baton Rouge, elderly couple harassed with fake liens. And last year in Tulsa, whole neighborhood fined for unauthorized mailboxes." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Pattern. They're not enforcing rules. They're testing how far intimidation can go." "And here," the sergeant added, "Oakwood Heights." The crowd had gone quiet again, listening. The names of other cities hung heavy in the air. This wasn't just their problem anymore. It was a scheme spanning states. Sarah's voice cut clear. "Community Security Solutions is under investigation starting now. Every check, every notice, every so-called violation this HOA pushed through them is evidence." She turned to Gregory. "And you, Mr. Allen, are personally responsible for unleashing them on your neighbors." Gregory wilted, shoulders sagging. I didn't know." "You knew enough to write the checks," Sarah shot back. "You knew enough to sign the contract. And you knew enough to target me because you thought the sheriff wouldn't fight back in her own neighborhood." Gasps rippled. A deputy clicked open a second evidence bag, sliding in Gregory's clipboard and a stack of HOA invoices stamped with Community Security Solutions. The sound of the seal snapping shut was final, like a cell door. I stood watching, the weight of it pressing on me. This wasn't a spat about mailboxes or hedges anymore. This was organized intimidation. Corporate muscle dressed up as law. And standing there, I realized something else. If CSS had run scams in Dallas, Baton Rouge, Tulsa, Oakwood Heights was just another dot on their map. We were in the middle of something much bigger. By evening, Oakwood Heights wasn't the same neighborhood it had been that morning. News vans lined the curb. Deputies still patrolled the block. And the HOA clubhouse, usually half empty on meeting nights, was packed wall to wall. I sat in the back, shoulder to shoulder, with neighbors I'd waved at for years, but never really spoken to. Tonight, though, we weren't strangers. We were angry, restless, ready for answers. Gregory Allen stood at the front with his ever-present clipboard, though his shirt was wrinkled now, his voice already trembling. He tried to start with the usual calm authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's keep order. What happened this morning was an unfortunate misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding," someone shouted from the crowd. "They had guns." "They tried to arrest the sheriff," another voice added, drowned quickly by claps and shouts. Gregory raised both hands. "Please, let me explain. The board authorized additional enforcement measures through community security solutions. Their methods may have exceeded expectations, but it was for the good of the community." Phones shot up like torches. Neighbors booed. One man yelled, "We didn't vote for that." Sarah stepped forward from the side of the room, uniform crisp, badge gleaming. The clubhouse quieted, not out of respect for Gregory, but for her. "This morning," she began, her voice steady, "4 armed men in fake police uniforms came to my home. They pointed loaded weapons at my husband. They waved a forged court order with my name on it, and they claimed authority under your HOA. Gasps rippled through the room. Even those who'd seen clips online looked shaken hearing it from her directly. Sarah held up an evidence bag. Inside, the forged warrant, now sealed and tagged. "This isn't rumor, this is evidence. It carries the HOA's logo, the name of a shell division, and the fingerprints of one Gregory Allen." Every phone in the room zoomed in. Gregory's face flushed. He sputtered, That's taken out of context." "No context justifies impersonating law enforcement," Sarah snapped. "No context justifies endangering children on their way to school or neighbors stepping onto their porches to film. What you funded today wasn't compliance. It was criminal." A murmur of agreement swelled, louder with every sentence. Sarah turned toward the crowd. "You all pay dues. You all trusted this board. Ask yourselves, where did your money go?" At that moment, a deputy set up a projector. The lights dimmed, the screen flickered, and then raw video footage from the morning. The imposters pounding on our door, me opening it, Sarah stepping out in uniform. The crowd saw the moment guns were leveled at me. They heard Sarah's radio confirm, "No warrants, 4 impersonators." They saw her drop the scar-faced man on the porch like a sack of flour. When the lights came back up, the room erupted. Shouts, curses, neighbors pointing at Gregory like he was already in handcuffs. "Resign!" someone roared. "You put us all in danger!" shouted another. "My kids were outside when this happened." Gregory's voice cracked as he tried to shout over them. I acted in the community's interest." Sarah raised her hand, silencing the room without effort. "The community speaks for itself tonight, and it says you abused your position. You endangered families. You hired criminals and called them officers. That ends now." The silence that followed wasn't passive. It was a silence that burned. Every set of eyes bore down on Gregory. Even his closest allies on the board leaned back in their chairs, refusing to stand beside him. I looked around and felt it. The neighborhood had changed. People weren't just angry, they were awake. Sarah stepped back, folding her arms. "The floor is yours," she told the crowd. And with that, Oakwood Heights erupted into something we'd never seen before. Real democracy. Voices clashed, residents shouted, fingers jabbed at Gregory, demands for resignation rolled like thunder. For the first time, Gregory Allen wasn't in control of Oakwood Heights. The people were. The clubhouse felt like it was on fire, not from heat, but from voices. Neighbors shouting over one another, demanding justice, waving phones high like torches at a trial. Gregory Allen stood at the front, clipboard trembling in his hands, sweat darkening the collar of his golf shirt. For years, he'd ruled Oakwood Heights with fines, threats, and endless letters taped to doors. Tonight, the walls were closing in. Sarah let the noise swell before raising her hand. "Order," she said, not shouting, but with the steady tone of someone who'd led men with rifles into worse situations than this. The crowd settled, not for Gregory, but for her. "Your HOA president," she continued, pointing directly at Gregory, "authorized armed imposters to invade this community. He signed checks to Community Security Solutions, who dressed criminals in uniforms and sent them to my door with forged papers. That's not leadership. That's betrayal." Applause thundered. Someone shouted, "Throw him out!" Another yelled, "We're done with you, Gregory." Gregory's voice cracked as he tried to salvage his ground. "You're all overreacting. This was a mistake. Clerical, administrative." "Clerical doesn't point a gun at a homeowner," a man in the back snapped. "Clerical doesn't forge a judge's signature." Laughter, bitter and angry, rolled through the room. Gregory's arguments were ashes before they left his lips. Sarah stepped aside, letting the people take over. "This is your meeting, your choice. You decide whether this man speaks for you tomorrow or whether tonight Oakwood Heights finally takes back its voice." The words struck like a match. Mrs. Parker, usually quiet as a church mouse, stood up from her folding chair. Her voice quavered, but her hand was steady as she raised it high. "I make a motion to remove Gregory Allen as HOA president, effective immediately." Cheers exploded. Dozens of hands shot up. Phones filmed every second. Gregory's face went white. He stammered, "That's not in order. The bylaws. The bylaws require 30 days' notice." Sarah cut in, crisp as a gavel. "The bylaws don't shield felonies. Fraud voids authority. And tonight, the people have spoken." The board members at Gregory's side shifted uncomfortably. One leaned into his mic, voice soft. "Seconded." And just like that, the motion was real. "All in favor?" Sarah asked, her eyes sweeping the room. A sea of hands rose. Phones lit the air like 1,000 tiny stars. Voices chanted, "Aye, aye, aye." Gregory clutched his clipboard like it might anchor him. His hands trembled. His mouth opened, but no words came. For the first time, the man who had fined people for bird feeders and mailbox paint had nothing left to say. "All opposed?" Sarah asked. Only silence. The gavel she borrowed from the board chair cracked down on the table. "Motion carried," she declared. "Effective tonight, Gregory Allen is removed as president of the Oakwood Heights Homeowners Association." The room erupted. Neighbors clapped, shouted, hugged. Phones buzzed with live streams blasting the moment out into the world. Even the local reporter in the back stood grinning, already typing his headline. Gregory sagged into his chair like a man deflated, clipboard sliding from his hands onto the floor with a hollow clatter. But Sarah wasn't done. "Listen to me," she said, cutting through the cheers. "Tonight is not just about removing one man. It's about ending the culture of fear that let him believe he could hire thugs in uniforms to control you. From now on, Oakwood Heights will not be ruled by threats. You will choose transparency. You will demand accountability. You will lead yourselves." Her words rolled through the room like thunder. Faces glowed with something I hadn't seen in months. Hope. Gregory finally found his voice, but it was weak, trembling. You don't understand. You've made enemies. Bigger than me. Bigger than this neighborhood. They'll come after you." Sarah's eyes hardened. "Let them. I'll still be standing." Deputies stepped forward then, not to arrest Gregory, not yet, but to escort him out. His face was pale, his steps slow, his shoulders hunched under the weight of humiliation. Phones tracked him all the way to the door. When it slammed shut behind him, the clubhouse erupted again, louder than before. I looked around and felt it in my bones. Oakwood Heights had turned a corner. The fear was gone. The people were awake, and Sarah had lit the fuse. But Gregory's final words echoed in my mind. Bigger than me, bigger than this neighborhood. And deep down, I knew tonight was victory. But it wasn't the end. The next morning, Oakwood Heights woke to a different kind of siren. Not police, media. News vans lined the street, satellite dishes pointed skyward. Reporters clustered at the end of the block, microphones ready, voices urgent. Helicopters thumped overhead, circling like hawks. By breakfast, Oakwood Heights was on every major channel. Clips from neighbors' phones ran on repeat, the pounding on our door, the imposters shouting, Sarah stepping onto the porch with her badge flashing in the sun, and the moment she twisted the scarred man to the ground, played again and again, framed as the turning point. By noon, the headline scrolled across national news. Sheriff's neighborhood targeted by fake cops. HOA president ousted amid scandal. It wasn't just local anymore. The district attorney held a press conference, standing stiff behind a podium flanked by flags. "We are pursuing charges of impersonating law enforcement, falsification of legal documents, conspiracy, and reckless endangerment. Community Security Solutions, LLC, is under federal review. We will not tolerate criminal intimidation disguised as neighborhood enforcement. Reporters shouted questions. One asked if Gregory Allen himself faced charges. The DA's jaw tightened. No one is above the law. If evidence ties him to criminal acts, he will be prosecuted. That clip spread almost as fast as the footage from our porch. By evening, social media burned with hashtags. Fake cops, HOA scandal, Sheriff vs. HOA. Memes sprouted like wildfire. Sarah's badge photoshopped over movie posters. Gregory's sweaty face paired with captions like, "Neighborhood tyrant down." Neighbors who once hid behind closed doors now spoke boldly to cameras. Mrs. Parker, hair still in curlers, told one reporter, "We were scared of Gregory. He fined me for a flagpole, but now he's finished." Sheriff Sarah gave us our voices back. It was messy. It was loud, but it was justice in the open. Still, underneath the noise, the danger hadn't gone away. That night, Sarah sat at our kitchen table, laptop open, files spread around her. Deputies had delivered stacks of invoices pulled from Gregory's clipboard, payments routed from HOA dues directly to CSS. Line items marked compliance enforcement totaled tens of thousands. "This wasn't just Oakwood Heights," she said, rubbing her temples. "CS is running the same play in neighborhoods across 3 states. They test boundaries, see how far intimidation goes before someone pushes back." I leaned against the counter, watching her. "And you were the pushback." She gave a tired smile. "And now they know exactly who stood in their way." That thought landed heavy in the room. Later, the phone rang, late enough that my gut tightened. Sarah answered, voice steady. It was the governor's office. They wanted her in the Capitol by Monday to brief on community safety vulnerabilities. By the time she hung up, her expression had hardened. "This isn't just about an HOA anymore. The state wants answers." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Gregory warned us, said it was bigger than him. What if he wasn't bluffing?" Sarah closed the file in front of her and looked at me, her eyes sharp but weary. "Then we're not just cleaning up Oakwood Heights. We're pulling the curtain back on something much larger, and once it starts, there's no going back." Outside, the street was quiet again, the chaos of cameras and cruisers fading into night. But for the first time since this began, I didn't feel peace in that quiet. I felt the weight of a storm still gathering. Oakwood Heights had won its battle, but the war, the one stretching far beyond our neighborhood, was only just beginning. 2 weeks later, the clubhouse that once echoed with Gregory Allen's voice stood empty. The windows were dark, the notice boards stripped bare. The man who fined neighbors for bird feeders and paint colors was gone. Gregory hadn't left quietly. Deputies cuffed him in broad daylight, cameras rolling, neighbors cheering. The charges were heavy: conspiracy, fraud, reckless endangerment, misuse of funds. His clipboard, once a symbol of his control, was logged as evidence. The same day, federal agents raided the Houston office of Community Security Solutions. News showed boxes hauled out, hard drives seized, executives led away in suits that looked less sharp under handcuffs. A reporter announced CSS contracts spanned 12 neighborhoods across 3 states, all under review. Oakwood Heights felt lighter. Mailboxes sprouted flags again. Kids rode bikes without parents peering nervously over fences. The fear was gone, replaced by something we hadn't felt in years: freedom. Neighbors stopped Sarah in the street to thank her. Some called her a hero. She just smiled, shook her head, and told them she was doing her job. But I knew better. She hadn't just done her job. She'd risked everything, our home, our peace, to stand against a machine designed to silence people like us. One evening, after the dust had settled, we sat on the porch with coffee. The air was cool, cicadas humming in the trees. For the first time in weeks, there were no flashing lights, no shouts, no reporters, just quiet. Sarah leaned back, eyes on the darkening sky. "Oakwood Heights will rebuild," she said softly, "but this isn't over." I frowned. "Gregory's gone. CSS is finished. What more is there?" She turned her gaze to me, steady and sharp. "Gregory was a symptom. CSS was a tool. Someone funded them, pushed them, gave them cover. You don't build a network like that without deeper pockets and higher friends." Her words sank like a stone in my chest. I thought back to Gregory's warning at the clubhouse. Bigger than me, bigger than this neighborhood. At the time, it sounded like desperation. Now it sounded like prophecy. We sat in silence a long while, the night pressing in. Across the street, Mrs. Parker's porch light flicked on. Down the block, kids laughed, free again to be children. Normal life was returning, but beneath it, something darker hummed. I looked at Sarah, the silver of her badge catching the porch light. She wasn't just my wife. She was the line between order and chaos, and the chaos wasn't finished. When I finally spoke, my voice was low. So, what happens when the next wave comes? She didn't look away from the sky. Then we'll be ready. And in that moment, I believed her. But deep down, I knew the storm that began on our porch hadn't ended with Gregory Allen's fall. It had only shown its face. Somewhere beyond Oakwood Heights, in offices and boardrooms we couldn't yet see, the real enemy was already watching, waiting, and this time they knew our names.